The Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour was one of the boldest and most talked-about television shows of the 1960s. Hosted by real-life siblings Tom and Dick Smothers. The show aired on CBS and quickly developed a reputation for blending sharp humor, live music, and pointed political commentary. But what truly set it apart, what made it unforgettable, was a moment that wasn't planned, wasn't approved by the network, and yet still made it onto national television. That moment would go down in TV history, remembered simply as the Blooper. The incident occurred on September 17, 1967. During a live performance by the explosive British rock band The Who, they were performing their iconic anthem, My Generation, when drummer Keith Moon decided to go off script. He secretly loaded his drum kit with far more explosives than the stage crew had anticipated. As the song reached its climax, Moon detonated the charges, sending a fiery burst of smoke, debris, and shock waves across the set. The blast wasn't a prank, and it definitely wasn't safe. It was raw, scripted rebellion, and it played out live on American TV. The chaos left guitarist Pete Townshend with permanent hearing loss. In the stunned silence that followed, Townshend grabbed Tom Smothers' acoustic guitar and smashed it. On stage, the hosts were shocked, the audience stunned, and the network blindsided. But to understand why this chaotic moment mattered so deeply, we have to rewind and look at where the Smothers Brothers came from. Tom and Dick's journey, too. Television stardom began with loss. Their father, Major Thomas B. Smothers, Jr., was an officer in the U.S. Army during World War II, after Japan invaded the Philippines. He was captured and survived the infamous Bataan Death March, one of the most brutal episodes in military history. Tragically, he died in a Japanese prison camp before the war ended. Some reports say he was cremated. Others claim he was buried at sea. What's certain is that he never returned home. Their mother, Ruth, raised them alone in California, facing years of hardship and limited financial means. Despite the emotional and economic struggles, the Smothers Brothers found a way to cope through humor. Instead of growing bitter, they turned pain into laughter, which would later become the heart of their comedy. Their big break came in 1959 at a San Francisco nightclub called the Purple Onion. Initially booked for a 2-week gig, their act was so compelling that their engagement was extended to an incredible 36 weeks. They brought a fresh blend of folk music and comedy that felt authentic and groundbreaking. Audiences connected with them because of their sincerity. They didn't pretend to be polished or perfect. They bantered like real siblings. Tom played the goofy troublemaker, and Dick the straight man trying to rein him in. Their now iconic line, "Mom always liked you best," resonated because it felt honest, rooted in sibling rivalry everyone could relate to. In 1961, they released their debut record, Smothers Brothers at the Purple Onion, which was a commercial success and opened the doors to television. CBS, struggling to compete with NBC's Sunday night powerhouse Bonanza, took a risk by offering Tom and Dick their own show. Thus, the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour premiered on February 5, 1967. At first glance, it seemed like another standard variety show: music, jokes, and celebrity guests. But soon viewers realized this show was unlike anything else on TV. Brothers weren't afraid to confront real-world issues. They poked fun at the Vietnam War, criticized politicians, and invited controversial musical guests like Pete Seeger, who had been banned from television for years due to his anti-war stance. The show quickly became smart, edgy, and unpredictable, and young people loved it. Within just 2 weeks, the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour was beating Bonanza in ratings, signaling that a generational shift was underway. Young Americans had found a voice on television that reflected their frustrations and hopes. Tom Smothers had secured near-total creative control before the show began, a move CBS reluctantly agreed to in desperation for a hit. But once the show started pushing political boundaries, the network grew increasingly nervous. CBS began censoring jokes, cutting musical segments, and reviewing every second of footage before air. Rather than backing down, Tom and Dick leaned into the resistance. They made jokes about the censorship itself, often submitting a clean version of the show for review, and then swapping it out at the last minute with a more provocative one. This kept the show's rebellious spirit alive, and well if not infuriating the network in the process. Behind the scenes, the writing team was a hotbed of talent. The show launched the careers of some of comedy's greatest minds: Steve Martin, Rob Reiner, Lorne Michaels, and David Steinberg, to name a few. These young writers brought a sharp, defiant edge to TV that hadn't existed before. They weren't just writing jokes, they were challenging the very limits of what could be said on national television. Their influence would shape future cultural staples like Saturday Night Live and All in the Family. The show wasn't just about laughter. It was about speaking truth to power, amplifying the voices and ideas mainstream television usually ignored. That's why the explosion during The Who's performance was more than just a dramatic moment, it was a symbol. When Keith Moon's drum kit erupted on live TV, it wasn't merely noise. It was a rebellion against the polished, tightly controlled world of corporate television, a raw burst of energy that could neither be edited nor contained. Pete Townshend's hearing was permanently damaged. The blast left band members stunned, and the audience in momentary silence before erupting in cheers. Tom Smothers' guitar, smashed without warning, became a sacrificial symbol of the chaos. The show continued to push boundaries. In 1968, the brothers invited folk legend Joan Baez, who wanted to dedicate her performance to her husband David Harris, who had been jailed for draft refusal. Yes, CBS cut most of her dedication, fearing backlash. Even President Lyndon B. Johnson personally called CBS to demand they tone down the political content. When Richard Nixon took office, the pressure didn't let up. The government was alarmed that a comedy show held such sway with the youth. When Harry Belafonte performed a song while footage of police violence aired behind him, CBS chose not to broadcast it, instead selling the airtime to Republican campaign ads ironically, supporting the very system the performance was criticizing. As the show continued to stir controversy, CBS began demanding that every joke, every song, lyric, every sketch be submitted 10 days in advance. The review process became grueling and relentless. Some jokes were axed entirely. Sketches mocking the censorship itself were banned. One sketch, where Tom played a censor who kept cutting people off mid-sentence, was completely rejected. Another, with LMA, featured the line, "If we're not allowed to say anything important, we're just fooling you with empty jokes." That, too, was cut. The message was clear. Censorship wasn't just a challenge, it was taking over the show. Still, the Smothers Brothers didn't back down. They kept fighting to preserve their voice. But CBS had reached its limit. In April 1969, they abruptly canceled the show. Officially, the reason given was that the brothers failed to submit an episode on time. But everyone knew the truth. CBS had had enough. Even though the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour was one of the top 10 shows in the country, it was deemed too dangerous to continue. The cancellation triggered a public firestorm. The New York Times published editorials defending the brothers. Fans flooded CBS with letters. Artists and politicians rallied in support. It sparked a nationwide conversation about freedom of speech. Tom Smothers summed it up powerfully. "They're not just canceling our show, they're trying to shut down the truth." The brothers didn't leave quietly. They sued CBS for breach of contract, and after 4 years of legal battles, they won. A judge awarded them $776,300, more than $5.5 million in today's money. It was a legal victory, but it came too late. The cultural momentum had moved on, and their platform was gone. CBS replaced them with Hee Haw, a safe, apolitical variety show featuring country music and comedy. It ran for 23 seasons, proof the network preferred entertainment that didn't rock the boat. The Smothers Brothers attempted a comeback in 1970 on ABC, but the cultural winds had shifted. America was still at war, but audiences were weary. ABC asked them to tone it down, and viewers didn't respond. The show didn't last. In 1975, they tried again with a new program on NBC. The premiere drew high ratings, but creative clashes with producers and a lack of control over the content led to its quiet cancellation midway through the season. nearly 2 decades after being fired. CBS invited them back in 1988 for the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour 20th reunion. The reunion was warmly received.
Fans tuned in,
and critics appreciated the nostalgia. Writers like Steve Martin and Bob Einstein returned to contribute. The show earned 3 Primetime Emmy nominations. It was a gentler, more subdued version of its former self, but it reminded viewers of the impact the original had made. CBS even brought them back for a full season, though a writer's strike forced them to rely on older material. When the strike ended, new scripts helped breathe life back into the show, earning 5 more Emmy nominations. But the world of television had changed. The show lasted only 2 seasons, from 1988 to 1989, yet the legacy of the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour never faded. In 2022, University of California at Santa Barbara accepted the brothers' complete archive into its performing arts collection. Their contracts, tapes, letters, and photographs are now preserved for future generations. Curators noted that their contribution to free speech and comedy deserved to be honored forever, and they were absolutely right. The Smothers Brothers proved that comedy could be more than entertainment. It could be a tool for truth. Before Saturday Night Live, The Daily Show, or Last Week Tonight, there was the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour. Their show ran from 1967 to 1969, but it influenced decades of comedy and political satire. They helped launch the careers of Steve Martin, Rob Reiner, and George Carlin. They gave a national stage to artists like Joan Baez, Pete Seeger, and Harry Belafonte, voices that used music to demand change. They introduced America to the Beatles' Hey Jude and Revolution, and gave The Who one of the wildest televised performances of all time. Their legacy is a reminder that comedy doesn't have to be neutral. It can be bold, uncomfortable, and powerful. Their battle with CBS was never just about TV scripts. It was about who controls the narrative. Their refusal to back down inspired generations of comedians and truth-tellers. The explosive moment with The Who symbolized it all. Unfiltered, uncontrollable, unforgettable. Even decades later, people still talk about it not just because of the chaos, but because it stood for something. Tom and Dick Smothers didn't just entertain. They stood for what was right, even when it came at great personal cost. And in doing so, they reminded us all that sometimes the loudest laughs carry the most powerful truths.